Hey everyone, Miss Fisher here, and today we're reading chapters 15 through 19 of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. Let's get started. Chapter 15, Dee Dee. This story contains a problem and a solution. Dee Dee was a mousy looking kid. Unlike most children at Wayside School, she liked recess better than spelling. As soon as the recess bell rang, she would jump up from her seat and run out the door. There were big signs in Wayside School on every floor. No jumping down the stairs. Dee Dee never seemed to notice the signs. She jumped down the stairs. Some children took the stairs 2 at a time. Dee Dee took them 10 at a time. That was on the way down. It was funny. She never seemed to be in quite the same hurry on the way back up. There was another sign at Wayside School. No cutting across the grass. Dee Dee must have not seen that one either. She cut across the grass and ran up to Lewis, the yard teacher. "I want a green ball," Dee Dee said. The green balls were the best. "I'm all out of green balls," said Lewis. "Okay, then I want a red ball," said Dee Dee. The red balls were just about as good as the green balls. They didn't bounce as high, but actually, sometimes you don't want a ball to bounce too high. "I'm all out of red balls too," said Lewis. "Do you have anything left?" asked Dee Dee. Dee Dee meant anything besides the yellow ball. There was one yellow ball at Wayside School, and Lewis was always trying to get rid of it. It didn't bounce, and it never went the way it was kicked. "Anything at all?" asked Dee Dee. "Today is your lucky day," said Lewis. "I have one ball left, just for you, the one and only yellow ball." "No thanks," said Dee Dee. "Oh, come on, take it," said Lewis. "Why don't you ever have any green or red balls?" asked Dee Dee. "I do," said Lewis, "but the other children ask first. By the time you get here, they're all gone." "But that's because I have to come all the way down from the 13th story, or 30th story." "How do you expect me to compete with the kids from the first or second?" she asked. "That's why I saved you the yellow ball," said Lewis. "Everybody wanted it, but I saved it just for you." "I bet," said Dee Dee. She took the yellow ball and bounced it on the ground. It stopped dead with a thud. She stepped back, ran up, and kicked it. It went backwards over her head. She didn't bother chasing it. Instead, she played hopscotch with Jenny and Leslie. She thought it was disgusting. The next day, Dee Dee asked Mrs. Jules if she could go to recess early. "Why?" asked Mrs. Jules. "So I can get a green ball before Lewis gives them all away," said Dee Dee. "I'm glad you have a good reason," said Mrs. Jules. "Yes, you may go, but first spell Mississippi for me." Spelling was not Dee Dee's best subject. By the time she finally got it right, she was 5 minutes late for recess. She jumped down the stairs, cut across the grass, and ran up to Lewis. There were no green balls left. There were no red balls left either. However, there was still the yellow ball. Dee Dee played jump rope with Joy and Marcicia. It was no better than hopscotch. So Dee Dee's problem was to figure out a way to get a green ball, or at least a red ball. You already know that the story contains a solution. Dee Dee figured it out. See if See if you can too. Remember, everything you know about Dee Dee, Wayside School, and Mrs. Jules. Hint, the next day, Dee Dee brought cream cheese and jelly sandwich, some nuts, and shredded cheese in her lunchbox. Here's what happened. Just before recess, Dee Dee smeared the cream cheese and jelly all over her face. Then she stuffed her mouth with nuts and hung the shredded cheese from her nose. When she closed her eyes, she looked just like a dead rat. Todd was in on the plan. "Mrs. Jules," he called, "there's a dead rat in the classroom." Mrs. Jules was very put out. "I want that dead rat outside immediately." When Mrs. Jules said immediately, she meant it. Dee Dee instantly found herself on the playground. "I want a green ball," she said. Louis pretended he hadn't heard her. "May I please have a green ball?" asked Dee Dee. Louis gave her a green ball. "I don't know how you did it, Dee Dee, but you're first today," he said. When Mrs. Jules found out that Dee Dee and Todd had tricked her, she sent Todd home early on the kindergarten bus. Dee Dee threw the green ball on the ground. It bounced 50 feet straight up in the air, and then she caught it. "You don't like me, do you?" she asked Louis. "Sure I do," said Louis. "No, you don't," said Dee Dee. "Yes, I like you," said Louis. "No, you don't," Dee Dee insisted. "Yes, I like you. I really do," said Louis. "Are you sure?" asked Dee Dee. Yes, said Louis. Don't you believe me? I guess so, said Dee Dee. Do you like me? Asked Louis. You bet, said Dee Dee. You're my best friend. Terrific, said Louis. I always wanted to be best friends with a dead rat. Chapter 16. DJ. DJ skipped up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jewell's room. He was grinning from ear to ear, from nose to chin, from here to there, and back again. Hey, DJ, Todd shouted. Glad to see you. Todd was a pushover for smiling faces. Mrs. Jules heard him. She began to write Todd's name on the board under discipline, but when she saw DJ smile, she put down the chalk. Good morning, DJ, she said. What are you so happy about? DJ grinned and shrugged his shoulders. Mrs. Jules smiled. Damien looked at the smile on Mrs. Jules' face, then at Todd's, and finally at DJ's. Then Damien smiled too. His smile was almost as big as DJ's. They were best friends. Once they saw the two of them smiling, the rest of the class couldn't help but smile. Rondi had a very cute one due to her two missing front teeth. Nobody had an ugly smile. Jason came to school late. He was very upset, but the first thing he saw was Damon's smile, and he felt a little bit better. Then he saw Rondi's toothless grin, and he began to smile a little himself. But when he saw the piano on DJ's face, he fell, laughing onto the floor. Everybody started to laugh, even Kathy, and she could hardly ever laugh except when someone hurt himself. The whole room seemed to be laughing, not just the people in it. The blackboard chuckled, the ceiling snickered, the desks were jumping up and down, and the chairs were slapping one another on the back. The floor was very ticklish. It laughed until the walls turned purple. The wastebasket started to sing. All the pencils stood up and danced. Finally, things began to settle down. Mrs. Jules wiped her eyes and said, DJ, why don't you tell the class why you're so happy? At least let us know what we're laughing about. But DJ just kept smiling. Aw, come on, DJ, said Dee Dee. Tell us. DJ didn't say a word. He couldn't. His mouth was stretched out of shape. Let us guess, said Ron. If we guess right, will you tell us? DJ nodded his head. His smile began to hurt his ears. Everybody took one guess. Have you been swimming? Is it your birthday? Are you in love? Did you get a green ball? Nobody guessed right. At recess, DJ was still smiling. Louis, the yard teacher, called, Hey, DJ, come here. They walked to the far corner of the playground, where they were all alone. What's up, DJ? Louis asked. DJ just smiled. Come on, DJ, you can tell me. Why are you so happy? DJ looked up at him. He said, You need a reason to be sad. You don't need a reason to be happy. Chapter 17. John. John had light brown hair and a round head. He was Joe's best friend. John was one of the smartest boys in Mrs. Jewell's class, but he had one problem. He could only read words written upside down. Nobody ever wrote anything upside down. But it was only a little problem. John was still in the high reading group. He just turned his book upside down. It was easier for John to turn his book upside down than to learn to read correctly. But the easiest way isn't always the best way. Mrs. Jewell said, John, you can't go on reading like this. You can't spend the rest of your life turning your books upside down. Why not? Asked John. Because I said so, said Mrs. Jewell. Besides, what happens when I write something on the blackboard? You can't turn the blackboard upside down. No, I guess you're right, said John. I know I'm right, said Mrs. Jewell. You're going to have to learn to stand on your head. John couldn't stand on his head. He had given up trying. You would have to if you'd fallen over as many times as he had. Joe was John's best friend. He could stand on John's head. Every time John fell over, Joe stood on his head. After all, what are best friends for? My head's too round, Mrs. Jewell. I can't stand on it, said John. Of course you can, John, said Mrs. Jewell. If Joe can stand on your head, so can you. It's easy, John, said Joe. I can't, John repeated. I always fall over. Nonsense, said Mrs. Jewell. All you have to do is find your center of balance. Now up you go. John put his round head on the floor and swung his legs up. He fell right over. Then Joe stood on John's head. See, John, it's easy. Nothing to it, Joe said. We'll help you, John, said Mrs. Jewell. Joe, get off John's head and get me a pillow from under my desk. Nancy, Calvin, come here and give us a hand. Mrs. Jules took the pillow from Joe and set it on the floor. All right, John, we'll surround you, she said. We won't let you fall. John put his head on the pillow and swung his legs up. He started to fall one way, but Nancy pushed him back up. Then he started to fall another way, but Calvin straightened him out. John kept falling a little bit this way and that way until, at last, he found his center of balance. Hey, down, upside. Oh, sorry. Hey, look at me, said John. I'm up, I'm really up, I'm standing on my head. I found my center of balance. It's beautiful. I can read the blackboard. Hey, Calvin, bring me a book. You don't have to turn it upside down. Hey, who? Bam! While Calvin went to go get a book, John fell flat on his face. You better stay off my head, Joe, he warned. Are you all right, John? Asked Mrs. Jules. Yes, I think so. I feel a little funny. Hey, I can still read the blackboard, and I'm not upside down. I can read it right side up now. When I fell, I must have flipped my brain or something. That is wonderful, John, said Mrs. Jules. Here, put the pillow back under my desk. As a reward, you may have a Tootsie Roll Pop. They're in the coffee can on top of my desk. John placed the pillow on top of her desk. Then he looked under the desk, but he couldn't find the Tootsie Roll Pops anywhere. Chapter 18. Leslie. Leslie had 5 fingers on each hand and 5 toes on each foot. For each hand, she had an arm. For each foot, she had a leg. She was a very lucky girl. And she had 2 lovely long brown pigtails that reached all the way down to her waist. When Miss Jules asked Leslie a question, Leslie could raise one of her hands. When Leslie was adding, she could count on her fingers. When Paul pulled one of her pigtails, she could kick him with one foot while standing on the other. But Leslie had one problem. She didn't know what to do with her toes. She had 10 adorable little toes and nothing to do with them. As far as she could tell, they served no useful purpose. Suck your toes, that's what I do, said Sherry. But Leslie's foot wouldn't reach her mouth. Well, that's all toes are good for, said Sherry. She put her foot in her mouth and went to sleep. No, thought Leslie, they must be good for something. They just have to be. During recess, she asked Dana, Dana, what do you do with your toes? I scratch the back of my legs, said Dana. First, I scratch my left leg with my right foot. Then I scratch my right leg with my left foot. But my legs don't itch, said Leslie. That's good, said Dana. In that case, you can scratch my legs. With your help, I can scratch both legs at the same time. No, never mind, said Leslie. She walked up behind Louis, the yard teacher, and hopped on his shoulders. Louis, said Leslie, I don't know what to do with my toes. Louis tugged her foot. Yes, that is a serious problem, he said. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take them off your hands for you, or rather, your feet. Just cut them off and give them to me. What? Asked Leslie. You don't want them, so I'll take them, said Louis. You won't ever have to worry about them again. No, said Leslie. I'll give them to Miss Mush, said Louis. She wants to make little hot dogs out of them. Miss Mush was the lunch teacher. No, I'm not going to give my toes away, said Leslie. All right, said Louis. I'll give you a nickel apiece for 'em. No, you can't have them, said Leslie. Why not? Louis asked. They're no good for you. Anyhow, think of all you can buy for 50 cents. The bell rang. I'll think it over, said Leslie. She ran back to class. Mrs. Jules, said Leslie, I don't see any reason for keeping my toes. Oh, Leslie, I'm sure there are lots of good reasons, said Mrs. Jules. Well, I can't think of any. My legs don't itch, and I can't get my foot in my mouth. Louis offered me a nickel apiece for 'em, and it seems to me like a good deal, but I wanted to check with you first. I think Louis was pulling your legs, said Mrs. Jules. No, said Leslie, he was pulling my toes. What do you want with your toes? Asked Mrs. Jules. I don't know, said Leslie. But if he's willing to give me 5 cents apiece for 'em, then I'm going to take him up on it. That's 50 cents. At lunch, Leslie walked up to Louis. Okay, Louis, she said. You can have my toes for a nickel apiece. That'll be 50 cents. Not so fast, said Louis. Let me look at 'em. Leslie took off her shoes. Yes, said Louis. The big ones are good. The ones next to 'em? But the most I'll give you for the rest of your toes is 3 cents each. Leslie was furious. 3 cents each? You told me 5 at recess. I'll give you 5 cents for the big ones. But just look at those scrawny little runts of a toe on the end there. You're lucky to get even 3 cents for it. I think you're getting a good deal." "I happen to like that toe," said Leslie. "Fine then," said Louis. "Keep it. I'll just take the 2 big toes and we'll call it square." He reached in his pocket and pulled out a dime. "Nothin' doin', said Leslie. "These toes are sold as a set. It's either all 10 for 50 cents or no deal." "What am I going to do with just 8 toes?" "Then forget it," said Louis. "I'm not going to give you a nickel for those scrawny little end toes." "Fine," said Leslie. "No deal. My toes will still be here if you change your mind." She turned and walked towards the hopscotch area. "Wait a second," Louis called. "I'll give you $1 each for your pigtails." Leslie turned around and looked at him with a fiery eye. "Cut my hair?" she exclaimed. "Are you crazy?" Chapter 19. Miss Sarvy's. There is no Miss Sarvy's. There is no 19th story. Sorry. All right, that was chapters 15 through 19 of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. Next time, we'll start on chapter 20, Kathy. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye-bye.